Everybody okay? The lead instructor said. All of the students poked a thumb in the air. All right, now I'm going to give you something good, she said. At first, Vaughn felt the familiar rush return, but this was laced with something new. As the chemical soup began to flood her bloodstream, Vaughn recognized the adrenaline. But it had brought some friends. Suddenly, she became aware of the texture of her tongue. She rolled it around where it came into contact with her saliva glands, which began to flood her mouth with a bitter taste. She thought about letting this lock of spittle pour to the deck, but the instructor interjected. "Drink it down," she said, and Fawn swallowed the goop. "Congratulations! You have just converted vestige fluid into a usable substance. Now it'll go down to your gut, and in a few minutes everybody's going to feel nice," she said. She was correct. Fawn felt as though she was a superheroine, a national treasure, a symbol of goodness and sexy. No one could convince her otherwise. She clenched her fist and stirred on her feet, as did the woman next to her. "Now you'll be chasing Sergeant Rodella Adarga throughout the city. I know you all think you're badasses right now, but she holds the female land speed record, and she's a grade 5, she said. Rodella hopped up and down a few times, which drew Fawn's eyes to a unique symbol on Rodella's cordon loops that no one else had. Fawn assumed it was the speed record. Rodella took off casually, but even at that speed, she was like a blur. "Faceplates down," the instructor said. Silently, the black faceplate slid over Fawn's eyes. Inside, a HUD linked to the nanomachine implants in her eyes. She could see Rodella already streaking down the street. What looked to be flare and dressing on the HUD was actually the onboard computer, letting the user know where the target had been moments before. This system was a much more advanced HUD than what Fawn was used to. They were released into the city like hounds, turned on the scent of a fugitive. The euphoric sensation was intensified the faster Fawn moved. She dashed ahead, past machine-controlled sedans and trucks. Her fellow students were all around, leaping from the roofs of cars and swinging on light poles. As she leaped through a crowded intersection, Fawn had cleared most of the cross-traffic when a truck was in danger of clipping her. Immediately she rolled and sprung upward with a single hand, launching her in the middle of the next block. She could see Rodella ahead, and glided along the wet streets. A foolish student high on life plowed ahead of the pack and entered an intersection without looking, and was flattened by a supply truck. With a quick look back, Fawn saw the woman was muscling the truck aside, dumping it into the oncoming traffic. She surged ahead. Her HUD told her she was averaging a speed of 45 miles per hour. Then she saw Rodella make an abrupt stop, nearly standing still as Fawn whizzed past. "The fuck?" Fawn said, wondering how many scientific laws Rodella had just broken. Fawn slowed down and found a light pole to help her switch directions. She braced for the pain in her left arm, but none came. Then shot up the street towards Rodella and the oncoming horde. The risk eater was standing there waiting for the recruits to get closer. Then she seemed to fall sideways into the alley. The others rushed after her. Some had already discovered that ceilings and floors did not exist when one had vestige to burn. Fawn tried to jockey her way to the front, and then noticed the message from their instructor in her HUD. A stubby little avatar popped in the corner of her vision and began to explain to her the fineries of the dog box. Fawn nodded as the information was spat to her in rapid manner. The chemicals running through her body had her mind running at peak performance. She curled in a ball in midair and fell laterally onto the brick wall next to her. Then she leaped onto the roof on the other side of the alley. Here she was able to run without being crowded by the pack. Farther along, Rodella was running along a railing, backwards, to taunt them, still moving faster than her pursuers could handle. Anyone could run at high speeds with a skid, but very few had the courage and mental focus to make 90-degree turns and leap from buildings without looking. Rodella twisted and vaulted through the air as if she had access to a safety net at all times. There was no hesitation or apprehension in any of her movements. Many of the pack had been trailing at the start were gone, sidelined by injury or inversion sickness. In a few hours they would be complaining to the nurses that their feet did not touch the floor, disoriented by the after effects of manipulated sovereignty. Rodella weaved in and out of them as they tried to grab the flag which hung from her belt. Fawn hopped over a woman that had vomited in her face mask. It splashed the ground violently as it was ejected from the gills at the back of her suit. As the two women reached the mouth of the alley, Fawn watched as Rodella ran blindly into traffic. Fawn could feel that she was within Rodella's kill box. Before she could stop herself, she too was into the street. She could feel the cars barreling down on her. Then as she looked to her right at the oncoming cars, she saw a vehicle she could not avoid, driven by no one and carrying no passengers. Already preparing to lose her leg, Fawn winced just as her HUD began to react with the state of her body. The rest of her world darkened, except for what was in the woman's immediate vicinity. There was only Rodella, the rabbit she was following into this murky hole. Her movements began to mimic Rodella's as she followed her up the side of a building. Fawn saw her target's feet stutter, and then launched herself into the open air. Fawn was late anticipating the maneuver, and she flew off the side of a building and into the office of a high-rise across the street. The impact had torn through several desks and planted Fawn inside the warped doors of a conventional elevator. There was little pain, only the jarring feeling when she slammed into the wall. Her skid remained intact, even with the glass she had shattered on her way in. As she pried herself from the doors, she was greeted by Rodella. "Day 1, Rodella said, holding out her hand. "Fun stuff," Fawn said, taking Rodella's help. "You hurt?" "Nah." Brushing glass and rubble away from her shoulders. "Dirtbag," Rodella said. "The skid will protect you. Don't fear the pain." "How come they didn't just let us run around on some planet?" Fawn said. "They have enlisted infantry to do that. They want to monitor the intrinsics closely," Rodella said. "Wait up," Fawn said. "One more thing. How fast can you run?" "I run out of vestige before my speed plateaus," Rodella said. "I can't convert it fast enough." "Does everyone have to convert it?" Fawn said. "Technically no one does, but it's poison to everyone except Deicide," Rodella said. "You can take it without converting it, but it'll kill you eventually." When they arrived at the main entrance to the city, they saw more heavy brass gathered with the instructors in multiple divisions. Fawn quickly got into ranks with the other women. No one had been gravely injured, and many had smiles on their faces, even the woman who had puked into her faceplate. They swapped stories until Hellmouth turned to their lead instructor and cleared her throat. It was all she had to do to command silence. Their lead instructor quickly placed the divisions at attention. "Attention on deck," she said. Walking from the rear of the divisions was a figure wrapped in a strange black cloak. The fabric looked soaked and seemed to be shifting slightly all over his person. From what could be seen where the cloak was parted was the working uniform of an officer. But it was a slightly different cut. Hellmouth stepped aside a little as he turned toward the divisions. All of the other officers seemed to be keeping their distance as a sign of respect, but Hellmouth was unusually close. Being in the first rank, Fawn could see his face up close. Underneath the cuts and nicks was the face of a man who looked as though he was starting graduate school, not a warlord. From the way everyone spoke of him, Fawn assumed he was 12 feet tall and produced lightning from his penis. She could tell he was a manufactured killer, as his eyes did not fit his demeanor. In another life, perhaps secretly in this one, he would have been a philosopher. Fawn took him for a man that had spent most of his life gazing up at the heavens, wondering why. Deicide looked around as if he expected someone to interrupt him. "At ease, everyone," Deicide said. "No awards to give out?" His voice seemed to be amplified by some unseen device. Perhaps it was his true voice. Fawn could not tell. "Not today," Hellmouth said, lacking the cowed tone displayed by Deicide's other ranking subordinates. She exuded an unmistakable air of familiarity with the noble, like a mother speaking to her adult son. Many of the students were caught off guard, believing Hellmouth was unable to say a word without yelling it. "Welcome aboard, everyone. I'm sorry it took so long for us to have this little talk. Really, I'd rather be here than fighting off the rebels," Deicide said. "Not me," Baby Sister said, wrenching loose a few laughs. Fawn had grown to detest the sound of Baby Sister's scratchy voice, and was further annoyed that she was allowed to interrupt someone so important. "The rest of us have lives, Baby Sis," Deicide said, and then continued on. "What I wanted to tell you all is that you've made the right choice. Eventually there will be no place the Yolopile is not. No army that is not my own. You are the next generation of soldiers who will guard the lives of those within this ship. Only with your help will we be able to cross the Great Divide and avoid the terror that fate has unleashed upon us, Deicide said, as he looked on the ranks of women. Now, who has questions? Deicide said. Fawn was surprised again that his smile seemed genuine. His diamond eyes smiled when his mouth did, which somehow made her dislike him even more. How could this man be the devil she had seen tearing apart that city earlier? The grinders got you shook? Deicide said. Thankfully, someone raised their hand, even though they just asked him a softball question. When do we get paid, sir? A woman said. After first quarter, you all should receive funds directly to your accounts. I don't know what you're going to spend the money on, though. Soldiers don't need money. When's the last time you paid for something, baby sis? Deicide said. Fuck if I know, baby sister said. How about you, Sergeant Adarga? Deicide said. Rodella shook her head, seemingly embarrassed that she was called upon. Don't know, sir, Rodella said. Save your money for a summer home, or a condo for your flings, Deicide said. Oh yeah, baby sister said. Any more? Yes, Deicide said. Yeah, I'm guessing we can't use our blood money to buy back those planets you destroyed, Fawn said. She came out of a parade rest just as Hellmouth was charging her. Fawn slipped past her first punch, but could not avoid the hook that followed. The blow snapped her head to the right, and then she was grabbed by a pair of instructors. As Deicide approached her, she grinned. Blood filled the spaces between her teeth. Then he pushed his face close to her own, and blew an icy vapor into her face. She watched as he took notice of her hair, and brushed the pink strays out of her eyes. He began to nod when his eyes found her identification number on the side of her neck. Lock her in my wife's study, Deicide said. This time he grinned the smile of a wolf god. Fawn's pleasant disposition turned to a brooding scowl, and she watched as Hellmouth stepped to him to quietly protest. I'll straighten her out. Just have her sent to the brig, Hellmouth said. Am I the captain or not, Shay? Deicide said. His eyes seemed to be searching for something in her face. Hellmouth looked hurt. She shook her head at his implied accusation. It was she who had been in charge during his absence, though she did not wish to have the responsibility. Fawn noted the disagreement and guessed that Hellmouth was the man's conscience, at least in terms of his treatment of women. Hellmouth came closer to Deicide so only he could hear. Of course you're the captain. I'm only trying to guide you. Why are you angry at me? Hellmouth said, pausing. Not was my friend too, she said, waving the mosquitoes away that had hold of Fawn. As they dragged her between the columns of unqualified cadets, Fawn laughed. Well, at least your fucking breath doesn't stink, Fawn said.